We're now joined by one of our team members, Abdenour, who's going to do today's lightning round.
I'm going to say statements, and you, Eduardo, need to say if they are fact or myth. Okay?
Okay, fantastic.
Let's start with the first one. Al-Andalus was a paradise of peaceful coexistence between Muslim Christians and Jews.
That's a myth. It's a big myth.
Yeah, it's a
there was
big
not
myth.
such a thing as a coexistence, among all these communities.
The next up. The Reconquista was a non-stop war that lasted 800 years.
That's another myth. That's the difference. I mean, one is on one side, and this is the other side of the coin.
Al-Andalus was a violent foreign occupation, and everything was terrible until the Catholic monarchs showed up.
Al-Andalus, no, that's a myth. But it's also important to have in mind that the Arab conquest was a conquest. There was a conquest, because some people these days are denying that there was a conquest.
Christmas was celebrated in Al-Andalus by Christian population, even under Muslim rule.
No, that's a fact, because the statute of dhimmis, of people who are protected, they were allowed to perform their rituals and masses, provided they did it on the premises of the churches, not in public.
Okay.
Here's another one. Expression of same-sex desire existed in Al-Andalus.
Existed in Al-Andalus and existed everywhere. Everywhere. But what is interesting is that in Al-Andalus, this is something that was expressed sometimes. There was a different conception of body and relations and sexual relations in Al-Andalus than the concept that you had in the Christian societies. That's for sure.
You mean publicly expressed?
Yeah, or at least in literature, okay? Because that's it's different to say publicly, but in literature, there were a lot of elaboration about sexual relations and so on. And in general, the body had a different conception in Islamic societies. Yeah, that's for sure.
What about this one? Flamenco comes directly from the call to prayer in Al-Andalus.
No, look, no, no. And you know why? Because that tends to overlook the important contribution of gypsy communities. We have just celebrated last January the 600th anniversary of the arrival of the gypsies in Iberia. And this has been very important, and the gypsy community in Spain has celebrated as it deserves to be celebrated. You cannot understand flamenco without the contribution of gypsies communities and gypsy cultural heritage. We call, by the way, I call it gypsy because in Spain we say gitanos.
Yes.
And we don't say Romanis. And they like to be called gitanos, and because they feel very proud of that, and I think they should, because their contribution in Spain to Spanish culture has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andalusis rode camels through the streets of Córdoba.
Well, that's not a myth, that's a fact. Archaeological excavations have found bones of camel, not particularly in Córdoba, but in different places of Al-Andalus. And another interesting thing is that when I studied 10th century Córdoba, one of the things that I didn't find was chariots. For some reason, there are lots of references to horses, lots of references to donkeys, mules, and so on. There's some reference to dromedaries, but not in some sources. But you never find something like a carriage. Okay. So this goes with the idea by Richard Bullitt, who in his book on the camel and the wheel, he suggested that the camel replaced chariots and these sort of vehicles in Islamic cities.
Very interesting.
That's an interesting topic.
All right, let's try this one. 3-course meal were invented in Al-Andalus.
Oh no, that's not true. No, that's not true. I mean, people were having 2 or 3 that's the whole thing about. That's about Siryab. Siryab is this famous man who comes from Iraq and arrives in Al-Andalus and is greeted in Al-Andalus in grand style. And yeah, there's some things that are attributed to him. For instance, the asparagus thing. I mean, that he is the first one who tells the Andalusians that asparagus can be eaten and so on. So that's
And,
interesting.
and I think we found also a myth about Syriab saying that he invented deodorant.
Deodorant, yeah, and also but I think it's not a myth.
No, that's not a myth at all. I mean, he introduced the idea of
Brushing
brushing your teeth,
Okay.
and there are some references to gifts by caliphs in the 10th century, sending people sort of toothbrush.
Toothbrushes. Oh,
Well, you say he was a kind of an influencer of his time, Ziryab.
That was an influencer of his time. I mean, yes, people just he just dictated the fashion and told people how to dress and these sort of things. Yeah, so that's not a myth at all. He was very influential, but not the three meat course. Come on, I mean,
Okay. Many Christians in Al-Andalus spoke Arabic and adopted aspects of Islamic culture.
that's an absolute fact. I mean, this is a fact. I mean, people, Christians in Al-Andalus became Arabized, and it's also true that they took these many aspects of Islamic culture. And what's interesting, for instance, it's very interesting that when the Christians conquered Lisbon in 1147, I think, the Bishop of Lisbon was there in the city, and he was killed by the Christians because he was taken by a Muslim. So that shows you to what extent people became Arabized at that time.
All right, the last one. Andalusi culture is just a leftist, progressive, and even woke invention used to rewrite history.
Well, this is an absolute myth, but not only an absolute myth, it's a very, very dangerous statement that is circulating these days in Europe. And this is very worrying. I mean, we are joking about it, but it's very, very worrying because some people are saying these days that we should not learn or teach or be somehow concerned about Islamic civilization, Islamic history, and so on, or culture, and so on. And this is a very, very dangerous thing these days.
well, I think this is a wrap up.
That
Thank
was
you very
wonderful.
much, Eduardo and Abdenour.